Welcome back, art lovers. We are so happy to see you all present in another talk with us, the Art Duo podcast. I am Stefany.
And I'm Helen.
Today, we are traveling to see 3 different arts that will touch hearts and blow minds. So hang tight, everyone. Here we go.
Let's time travel to 1906, where we see Edith MacDonald Brown's Untitled Oil on Canvas painting. It's about 49 centimeters tall by 75 centimeters wide, and the technique of this painting is very satisfying to look at because the brushstrokes are nearly invisible.
Oh, yes, the technique has helped the piece come to life. And let's talk more about Edith. She grew up in a middle class family in Africville, Nova Scotia. After studying art in Montreal, she returned home to paint, and where she lived was established by black settlers that was wrongly raised by the city of Halifax in the name of industrialization.
This piece was made around the early to mid 19th century, and here we shift from neoclassicism to early modernism, naturalism, and post-impressionism. It was also a period of farm settlement where Indigenous Canadians found themselves in imminent destruction, and it was also extremely difficult to find artists that were Canadian Black individuals.
Wow, and look at her. She definitely broke that silence then. No surprise that she was also believed to be the first recorded Black female painter in Canadian art history. Now, this piece is one of the only 4 existing works since many of them got destroyed.
That's truly heartbreaking, but I'm happy that there was some change. Even now, it's such an honor to get to look at the artifacts that remain displayed in the Africville Museum.
Unfortunately, there is little information regarding their production and why these artworks were made. However, MacDonald Brown's work and the discovery of these paintings showcases an African-Canadian artistic presence prior to the 20th century, which contrasts popular Canadian art historical discourse.
I totally agree, and given the underlying questions about why it was made, it gives us as viewers a chance to develop our own meanings through the viewing experience to what this painting may represent. The first thing I noticed is the replete powerful colors and textures that make up the scene, which is typical of the romantic landscapes at the time.
Absolutely, and if we look at what makes up the painting, we see how the grass takes up half of the background space and the mountains with water take up the other half. And this painting also portrays a small herd of cattle in a mountainside meadow. As a viewer, the eyes draw attention to the black cattle first, and it seems to be sort of angry and powerful. And the golden brown cattle seem to be lost, innocent, or even scared.
It's great that you point that out, Helen, because I was going to talk about using light and darkness for propaganda. I honestly think she is trying to express the role of art and how it can propel something forwards to make a political statement. It really hits the nail on the head in evoking the discriminating emotions felt by Black artists. So could the cattle be a metaphor for territorial conquest? Maybe the beam of sunlight on the golden brown cattle may represent awareness to colonialism and discrimination. I think she is also reflecting fury and innocence, using such ambitious techniques for this period and showing others the beautiful paintings Black artists can make.
Animals also often represent freedom, pleasure, and hope in art. Bulls, bison, and cattle specifically are also animals that we often see recurring in art. For example, in Leaping Bull fresco that was found in Knossos, Crete, a bull is created using a lot of patterns and geometric shapes. And in the clay bison found from Touk du Duvert, bison are carved into cave structures, and these works depict similar animals, but the difference lies in the medium and the level of realism.
Great comparison, Helen. We can also see the study by Kumar and Melamed through this piece having nature, animals, and water present. Edith may be expressing her hopes of freedom through calming vistas and freeing symbols like nature and animals. In class, we also mentioned how animals are used to represent a portal, and perhaps she is portraying hope through a portal to a peaceful and non-discriminating world against them.
Wow, you couldn't have said it any better. And it's always important to look back at the adaptation of art, culture, and society to appreciate the freedom of art we have today.
Agreed, Helen. On that positive note, let's now time travel to 1953, where we stand in front of Kaozu Nakamura's oil on canvas abstract landscape painting, Forest. Nakamura is a second-generation Japanese-Canadian born in 1926 in Vancouver, BC. In high school, he studied drafting, mechanical drawing, and design. He also had formal art training in adult education programs and art departments. After he graduated, he became a founding member of Painters 11, which was a group of 11 abstract painters in Toronto. The first show opened in February 1954, and Nakamura's work was more figurative and subdued compared to his group, who were more stylistic. His group mates also inspired him into abstraction. He then passed away in 2002 at the age of 75, and now this piece can be found in the Robert McCullen Gallery in Oshawa.
Nakamura and his family were interned at a camp in Tajam, BC during World War II. Here, the nearby forests, mountains, and lakes were subjects of his landscape paintings. He later moved to Hamilton, Ontario after leaving the internment camp in 1944. This was because the BC government declared that Japanese Canadians would either be deported to Japan or they had to move east. Another important historical event during this time was the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Some of Nakamura's relatives in Japan were victims. However, Nakamura did not speak much publicly about his feelings regarding the bombings. In Toronto post-World War II, it was a time of social and political change as the public became aware of the inhumanities and hardships that Japanese Canadians endured during World War II.
Now, this painting was made after Nakamura moved to Toronto and studied art with professionals. It was here where his abstract style rose in his landscape paintings compared to his realistic landscape art. You can also see the Impressionist and Post-Impressionist influences in this piece.
And this leads us to view the concepts and overall viewing experience of forests. This piece uses a beautiful color technique of monocolor, so it has blue and green hues throughout the painting. And we can also see a Cézanne influence through the broken brushwork, which is where the brush strokes are independent and discernible. They're not smooth and they don't blend into each other. And there's also no horizon line. Overall, the painting constructs forms through color and doesn't use outlines to mark the objects in the art. And when we look at it, it feels simultaneously geometric, but also organic. There's no particular pattern, and it almost gives a kind of wild and free feeling. But if we analyze the shapes and colors, we can see that the lines, the branches are straight lines, and there are a lot of square blocks of color that give it the geometric feel.
This is amazing, and if you think about it, this painting really connects to Monet's House of Parliament oil painting. Both use very loose painting on canvas that allows abstraction to really form. In both, we cannot directly identify what the painting is at first, but after looking at every basic principle and basic element of art like color and shapes, we begin to find some kind of honest application of art and reach abstraction. What do you think, Helen?
Nakamura was heavily influenced by Impressionist and Post-Impressionist painters like Monet and Cézanne. So for example, Cézanne's Still Life with Commode, which is an oil painting. We discussed this in class, and he was described as the bridge between realism and abstraction because you can still discern the subjects of his painting, but the perspectives and lines are skewed. And I definitely see that influence in Nakamura's forest because you can tell that the painting is still the forest, but the focus is not on realism.
Now this brings us to our last destination, Ana Mendieta's 1976 Árbol de la Vida, aka Tree of Life, site-specific performance from the Silhouette series. This was a nude body art performance using mud and nature. However, how it was presented to us was a colored photograph lifetime print. The performance was taking place in the UK during the feminist, photorealist, and contemporary art period. Now, Ana was a Cuban-American performance artist, sculptor, painter, and video artist best known for her earth body artwork, exploring female identity through photography, film, and sculpture. Her life was also quite turbulent. When she was 12, she was exiled from Cuba and sent to an orphanage in Iowa, United States. During her career, Mendieta created work in many countries. Historically, her works are generally associated with the four basic elements of nature and include metaphors for life, death, rebirth, and spiritual transformations with the earth. She felt that by uniting her body with the earth, she could become whole again and used it to emphasize the societal conditions by which the female body is colonized as the object of male desire and masculine aggression. For this piece, Mendieta plastered herself in mud before standing with raised arms, giving a sense of surrendering and freedom at the base and uniting with the living tree. Her work was somewhat autobiographical, drawing from her history of being displaced from her native Cuba and focused on the themes including feminism, life, death, identity, and belonging. Mendieta's physical presence in the space demands recognition and forces the audience to think about the responsibility they have to address sexual violence. What else do you notice, Helen?
I think her state of nudity is pure, vulnerable, and powerful, bringing life to the picture. Perhaps her arms up come off as a surrendering position, but also a freeing one as she stands there very vulnerable to nature.
The nudeness here also reminds me of something the Guerrilla Girls would do or similarly have done with the 1989 Met Museum poster. They are also feminist female artists like Ana. Although they are anonymous though, they have the same goal. Like photos of Ana's performance, they use photo and performance art for activism. Both artists use nudity to make commentary on feminism as well, and the Guerrilla Girls portrayed how hard it is for women to get into art museums without posing nude. Ana also emphasizes how the female body is colonized as the object of the male desire and aggression, and being nude ties into the suffering females go through in terms of the male gaze. So there's similar ideology used to speak out on the sexualization of women and art.
Before we wrap up this week's podcast episode, we want to now see how all these works connect in their own ways while remaining different. So the first difference is a difference in technique used to express nature. One of these paintings is a realistic landscape painting, one of them is an abstract painting, and one of them is performance art. There's also a difference within subject matter within the category of nature. So in Edith Hester MacDonald Brown's painting, there's a depiction of wildlife, But in Nakamura's forest, it's just a natural landscape without any human interaction or any wildlife. And in Ana Mendieta's Arbol de la Vida, the entire piece is about the interaction between human and nature. Also, Ana Mendieta's Arbol de la Vida is a completely different medium. It is performance art and it was captured in a photograph. I'm really curious about what the actual performance was like. I imagine it was very powerful and moving because just the single still image itself is very evocative.
Absolutely, Helen. They're all very similar as they use nature to spread a message, and all paintings were done by artists from marginalized groups. We see nature through their lens compared to a colonial lens that many of the landscape paintings we discussed in class had. These works are also evidence of art being inherently political. Mendieta's piece is explicitly political, but Nakamura and Edith's paintings do not appear or are intended to be political upon initial viewing. However, when we know the historical context of these works, we can see how they were very significant works during their time of creation. Thanks so much for joining me today to discuss these 3 beautiful works of art, Helen.
Thank you, Stefany. I had a lot of fun today.
And thank you, everyone. See you next week on The Art Duo.